Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Adam, thank you for coming to New York. You know, we have done this many times.
We have, and it's usually on my turf, not yours.
This is what I was about to say. I was going to ask you what is different this time around, and that's exactly right. You have finally come to my house, and I was reflecting on this, and I was wondering, what kind of an idiot am I that I have agreed to go to your turf like 7 times in a row before demanding that we return the favor? This is like in basketball, this is like someone ceding, home territory and saying, oh, let's just do it at your arena.
I had no idea how uncomfortable it was to not be in charge until right now. I will say, though, you once invited me to your actual house where we had dinner and you cooked.
That's true.
Do you remember this?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that was necessarily to your advantage if I was cooking. But
well, it definitely wasn't, because I've never told you this, but do you remember what you cooked?
No.
I think it was tilapia.
Really?
Or it was something that swims, and I don't eat seafood.
Oh.
But I didn't want to hurt your feelings, so I ate it. So I feel like we're even.
Adam, that's very touching. You took tilapia for me. That's.
I did. I'm still paying for it.
I wanted to start. We're going to be discussing your book, Hidden Potential. Here it is, and I want to start with this little observation. This is an observation, not a complaint, by the way. Okay, just to be clear, I'm not complaining, but I'm looking at the blurbs on the back, and I just want to not read the blurbs, but just talk about who has blurbed your book. Okay, so the first blurb is from Serena Williams, right? World's greatest tennis player. The second blurb is from Mark Cuban, the famous owner of the Dallas Mavericks, the guy who was on Shark Tank, etc. The third quote is from Malcolm Gladwell, me. The fourth quote is from Yo-Yo Ma, world famous cellist. And the fourth quote is from U.S. Navy Admiral William McRaven. Okay, now, what's the theory behind the order? Why does Serena, did she say, I'll give you a blurb if you put me first? Like, who decided she goes first? Did Cuban say, I'm willing to go second to Serena, but not, if I'm behind Gladwell, you're not getting a, what happened? How did that work?
You've already put more thought into that than I did. I don't know. Publishers here, you can ask them.
It's not.
I didn't choose the order.
It's not alphabetical. Because.
Wait, are you trying to argue for a higher placement than third?
No.
Is that what's happening here?
No, I'm not sure.
I'm
not sure I belong third.
I
don't know why I'm ahead of, why would I be ahead of Yo-Yo Ma? Yo-Yo Ma in every way is more culturally significant than I am. I will be dead and forgotten, and people will be listening to Yo-Yo Ma.
Okay.
William McRaven defends this country, and you have him last? Like, where are your priorities, by the way?
I think it sounds like it's alphabetical except for Serena, I think, from what you just said.
That's like,
but hold on a second.
It's not alphabetical. Like, what?
I don't want to.
Sounds like it's alphabetical, except that it's not alphabetical.
This is how you treat a guest in your home?
Well, I mean, we have a history of me feeding you tilapia. So, all right.
I do want to say, though, I don't want to throw Yo-Yo under the bus, but I have enjoyed many books you've written and also recommended, and I don't know as much about his taste in books. Oh, so there may be a credibility signal.
Well, all right. All right, let's talk about your book, which I like a lot, by the way. Otherwise, I would not have blurbed it. And I have a bunch of questions. My first one is I want you to put this book in the context of your previous books.
Is this a test?
No, it's not. It's an honest question. So we have give and take, originals, option B, think again, hidden potential, okay? So as my favorite, one of my favorite public intellectuals is Tyler Cowen. I'm obsessed with Tyler Cowen. As Tyler would say, model this for me. Is there a thought process behind the progression of your books? Are you publicly working out a kind of an idea, or is this just happenstance that you happen to write the books that you do?
It might be a little bit of both. I don't know that I've thought hard enough about it, but I think that looking back, each book is about a different facet of character. So Give and Take is about generosity. Originals is about, in many ways, curiosity and how that fuels creativity. Option B is about resilience. Think Again is about, I think more than anything else, humility and open-mindedness.
Yeah.
And here we have a book that's actually about a whole bunch of character skills. So I guess I'm trying to capture all the things that matter about character that I missed in the previous books.
Yeah. Wait, this is interesting from a kind of intellectual level because you're an organizational psychologist.
Guilty as charged.
Yes, but you're interested in character, which is that's sort of an interesting twist, isn't it? You would think an organizational psychologist would be someone who would be interested in structures and procedures and those kinds of things. But all of your books, this is why I wanted to bring this up, are very much focused on something much kind of softer and more personal.
I would not have said softer. I would have said deeper.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that, yeah.
But yes.
By softer, I meant less tangible. I mean, less, when I think of an organizational psychologist, I think of diagrams, with boxes and lines between the boxes. But that's not what these books are about at all.
No, I'm a psychologist first, and I happen to do a lot of my work on people at work. But what I care about is people and the quality of their lives and how much they get to grow. And so if you happen to do that in an organization, great, but I could care less about the org chart. I have very little interest in making companies more profitable, but I care deeply about helping people reach their potential.
Yeah. Just as a side point, observation, and I'm not, again, this is very seriously, you do a lot of work with companies, and you're clear about the idea that your interest is not in making them more profitable.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have never walked in suggesting that I can help them profit in any way, shape, or form. I do want to help them learn and understand people, and I want to make their people better, and if that indirectly helps the organization, great.
Yeah, yeah. I want to make an additional observation about your books as a group, and that is that they're fundamentally about character, as you say, but you're also very interested in sort of interrogating our intuitive ideas about character, right? I'm always reminded, and you will know this, didn't Richard Nisbett and Lee Ross write a famous paper called was it called The Intuitive Psychologist?
Was it Intuitive Psychologist or Intuitive Scientist? Something like that.
Which was all about how our intuitions about psychology are wrong in the main. And that it seems to me a lot of what you're doing in your books, is this a fair summary of them, is you are continuing on that path of kind of interrogating our intuitive notions about psychology.
Some would call that Gladwellian.
No, I think you're deflecting now, Adam.
You literally just deflected.
I don't. No.
Is anyone else watching this happen? His deflection is accusing me of deflection. It's meta-deflection.
It's not. No, listen. I'm just a flat-out contrarian. There's a difference between someone who gently interrogates what we get wrong as intuitive psychologists and someone like me who just says provocatively and usually erroneously that everything we think is wrong. I'm a bomb thrower. You're not a bomb thrower.
Yeah, I guess I think that's a parody or a caricature of your work. But no, I think I start with really wanting to understand what makes people tick.
Yeah.
And how we can improve the quality of our lives. And then within that, I want to focus on what's surprising and unexpected. Yeah. So yes, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Which causes me pain to admit.
Like with Think Again, for example, the idea of valorizing humility as the kind of cornerstone, as the cornerstone of intellectual growth is really interesting. And not one, I imagine if you gathered a group of people, of students, and asked them, what did they think, what character trait did they think was the key to intellectual growth? Humility would not be in the top 3.
No, and that's why I wanted to write about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I go to work when we used to go to a physical workplace. And still, when I go to teach, I walk into the classroom and I think, Donald Trump and Elon Musk both attended this fine institution.
Yeah.
What would I want the next Trump or Musk to learn? And strangely, humility is very, very high on that list.
Yeah. Wonder how you could... So let's talk a little bit about this one. So tell me about the thought process that led you to think, okay, the next stage in this journey through character, I want it to be about hidden potential. How did you get there?
I always find it hard to figure out what was the thing that crystallized it. I don't know if you have this challenge too. I feel like in hindsight, there are all these moments that came together, and I don't know which one actually motivated me. I think one of the things that happened, though, that really mattered for me was I think the short version of the story is I was talking with a group of students, and one of them asked me how I decided to become a writer. And I said, well, I went down this path because I was once told that I couldn't write.
Who told you that?
The Harvard Writing Office, my first week of college, when they recommended me for remedial writing.
Yeah.
Which I was then told was for jocks and people who spoke English as a 6th or 7th language.
But Adam, and we're going to get to this. Can I remind you? You were a jock.
I mean, diving is not a real sport.
What? Come on. You're diving, by the way, Adam's high school diving coach is in the audience. Why would you say that in front of your high school diving coach?
I think he's the one who first told me, honestly.
What kind of person would say that in front of you? Okay, so wait, keep going. This is interesting.
Yeah, so I failed the required writing test as a brand new freshman. It was the first piece of feedback I got from Harvard. And if you think I had imposter syndrome before, like already worrying, like I'm the one mistake, I don't belong here, now I show up, I take the writing test, and they're like, nope, you must take an extra semester of writing, and you can't explain your thoughts coherently, and you don't know how to structure an argument. And I was like, I think I don't belong here.
Wait, have you gone back and read your writing from that part of your life?
I don't have much of it, which is probably a good thing.
What I'm saying is, was their assessment accurate?
I think that I was not very interested in structure. And ideas connected dots in my head very clearly, and I didn't always take the time to explain that to the reader.
Can you see glimpses, though, can you see potential in it?
A little bit, but not much, to be honest. And I think that's the point, right? That's why I wanted to write this book, is we make so many judgments of other people's potential.
Yeah.
And so often they're driven by starting ability. Do you have the raw talent? Are you a prodigy? Do you look extremely capable? And if the answer is no, you think you should give up.
Yeah.
Because you don't have what it takes. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think it counts out a ton of late bloomers. I think it overlooks many, many slow learners. And I think it also prevents us from stretching beyond our strengths and actually achieving more than we believe we're capable of.
By the way, if you read my writing as a college freshman...
Do you have any handy right now?
Not right now, but I have a lot of...
I think we would all enjoy hearing it.
No, you know what was unusual about it? I was, at the time, completely obsessed with William F. Buckley, as one would be living in Canada in the 70s. And I...
Wait, as a novelist or as a political theorist?
As a journalist. I had collected, me and my friend Terry, all of his books. And so I was doing a William F. Buckley imitation. If you recall, he wrote in this Baroque manner where every sentence had like multiple clauses and clauses within clauses and subordinate and references to Greek, philosophy, whatever. On and on and on and on, French turns of phrase, like just the most pretentious, complex, and that's what I was trying to do when I was 18. If you read it, you would have thought, what on earth is this kid from rural Canada up to?
So you also had hidden potential.
To your point, yeah, I don't think it was obvious what was going on if you read 18-year-old Malcolm. But this is interesting, because I associate you You're 18. Can you give us a little more insight into your 18-year-old self? You said you had imposter syndrome. Why?
I think I didn't have any sense of what it took to be a Harvard student. I remember going to my interview, and the interviewer was the first Harvard graduate I ever met. And I thought that was a different intellectual league. I didn't know if I was smart enough. I didn't have any patents yet. I did not get a perfect SAT score.
But you got in.
Yeah, but I didn't know exactly why or how. And they're just evaluating me from a bunch of pieces of paper, right? Which is a pretty poor proxy for somebody's potential.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know. And I met a few students who were going to be classmates, and some of them were just intimidatingly genius. I actually had a classmate who, his parents placed a full-page ad about him in the Boston Globe before we arrived for college.
Celebrating
all of his amazing accomplishments. He had like a 9.8 GPA. He he was the captain of every team and club in his school. He was a National Merit Scholar. Oh, and he worried that his dad, who had to work late at night saving lives as a surgeon, might fall asleep on the freeway, and so invented a device to detect if his dad fell asleep and would wake him in the car, and got a patent for that.
Yeah.
So I was clearly an imposter by
Forgive
comparison.
me, Adam, though, those of us who didn't get into Harvard are always baffled by those who did get into Harvard and profess to have imposter syndrome. I mean, it's a little hard.
Did you apply?
Why would I? Why?
So you didn't not get in. You didn't try.
Why would I? It wouldn't even occur to me to try.
You were constantly attacking the Ivy League. You have this giant chip on your shoulder, like they rejected me, and you didn't even let them reject you.
Adam, first of all, I'm living in rural Canada. I'm not even sure I knew what Harvard was. The Canadian dollar at that point was like 65 cents. Do you know what going to Harvard would have cost my poor father? I mean, it's unthinkable. And that's assuming I could have gotten in. How was I getting in? I'm not a, legacy. I don't fence. I forgot all the other things you need to do to get in.
Okay, so I had a similar attitude, right? I grew up, not feeling like I knew anything about this world. And I was planning like all my friends to go to Michigan or Michigan State.
Yeah.
And then mid-September of senior year of high school, I wake up one morning having had a dream that I went to Harvard.
This is like
out of the blue.
This whole conversation has suddenly veered off course.
I know.
It's just filling me with joy.
But I'm just going to tell you, I think it was because Good Will Hunting had come out the previous year. And I was like, should I apply to Harvard?
This is like an Old Testament story. Moses woke up in a terrible sweat. God had come to him in the night and said,
No.
Son, my son, your SATs are good enough. How long did imposter syndrome last when you were at Harvard?
I think probably first half of first semester. And then I met a bunch of like regular nerds and realized like most of us are overachievers.
Would you considered yourself a nerd at Harvard?
Yeah, I was even a nerd for Harvard standards. Yeah. Like I wrote part of my undergrad thesis while my roommates were throwing a party.
Oh, wow. I actually can beat that.
This is not a competition, Malcolm. You always want, like you're trying to win the nerd contest? What are you doing here? You already said you collected books as an 18-year-old. We get it.
No, Adam. First of all, I'm trying to make you feel better. And misery loves company. You're describing the kind of the emotional paucity of your teenage years, and I was trying to make you feel more comfortable about that.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Are you going to feed me fish now?
No. I had, true story, so little money when I was at college. By the way, this is Canada, where nothing costs anything, but even then I had no money, that I was forced to finish all of my school. We had year-long classes. I was forced to finish all my schoolwork before Christmas so I could spend the entire second half of the year working on other people's essays to make enough money so I could survive.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like it paid off, though.
Thank you. I feel like we've evened the playing field here. So, but Adam, so what I'm getting at with all these questions about your college years is to what extent this book strikes me. Each one of your books is steadily a little more personal. I know you're loath to reveal too much about yourself, but I'm wondering.
Is that true? I don't feel that way.
No, it is. You're like it's grudging. I feel I pull it out of you.
You do. You have to interrogate me.
I have to interrogate you.
That's fair, but that's not because I'm reluctant to share. It's because I don't think this should be about me. I'm interested in these ideas and the evidence.
I know, but some of the best parts of this book are where you illustrate some of your points with personal stories. And I'm wondering whether, in some sense, this book is a more personal project than your previous.
Yeah. It might be. I think I've gotten more comfortable realizing, I've gotten so much, reader feedback and also listener feedback from podcasts. We like hearing your personal stories. Don't always use the data as a crutch. I'm they're not a crutch. That's literally what I do. It's how I think. If you ask me a question about anything, I'll be like, well, what is the best randomized controlled trial on that?
Yeah.
So this is not me avoiding sharing. It's that I consider systematic evidence to be a better source of knowledge than my idiosyncratic lived experience. But I realize that a lot of people's brains don't work that way, and that a lot of people connect to the stories. And I think I've come around to the idea that, yes, if I'm sharing my story in service of explaining an idea or revealing a lesson, then that's not about me. That's actually me trying to offer a gift from my life to theirs. And I think I was more reluctant to do that in the past, and now I'm much more open to it. But I think to your point, this is also, it is more of a personal project in the Brian Little sense, because
who's Brian Little?
Brian Little is my Canadian undergraduate thesis advisor who put personal projects on the map in psychology. And I think this book is a personal project because I've realized over the course of writing it that all my achievements that I'm actually proud of were things that I started out bad at.
Yeah.
And I thought most of my life the opposite was true. I thought what I was supposed to be proud of were the things that came naturally to me.
Yeah.
And so this is a chance to try to, finish that reversal.
So this is really interesting, and I want to dig into many parts of this. But I want to start with, we were talking earlier about the kind of hidden project in many of your books is interrogating our kind of lay notions about psychology that are incorrect. And I'm curious about this. So the lay notion this book is, to your point you just made, the lay notion this book is focused on is we have this kind of veneration of innate ability. But in fact, what the evidence suggests is that many of the most important accomplishments we have are not about what we start with, but what we acquire along the way. And what I want to know is, what I'm curious about is, why do we have, in this specific respect, a lay notion that's so clearly at odds with the facts? Why would we venerate innate ability if innate ability is not nearly as important as, what's the reason for that?
It's such an interesting question. I wish you had asked me this before I finished the book, because I feel like I should have written about it. But let's try to finish that unwritten chapter now. I think, off the top of my head, I think there are a couple things going on. Number one, I think that admiring innate ability lets us off the hook a little bit. How many parents do you know that are living vicariously through their kids? I mean, your kids are 2 in less than a year, so.
It's already started.
You were already bragging about preternatural calm backstage, which I loved.
I'm going to share a couple photos with you guys. Go on.
All right, so I think that a lot of people, whether it's wanting their kids to be highly intelligent or accomplished in their careers, or great athletes or incredible musicians, whatever dreams people have unrealized, they often impose on their kids. Mm-hmm. And I think saying I didn't have the natural ability is a convenient way to say, you know what? Like, maybe I didn't waste my potential. I didn't squander an opportunity, which is a lot of cognitive dissonance to live with. To say maybe I could have been great and I didn't have the right approach to learning or the right level of discipline or the right coach. That's unsettling to think about. And so I think just, kind of blaming, right, a lack of progress on raw talent, it lets us off the hook a little bit, would be one thought. I think the second thought is that when we see natural talent, we're just blown away by it. If you've ever watched a 4-year-old play Mozart, it's mind-boggling. And you realize that is a human that's cut from a different cloth than me. And so it's hard to ever see yourself in that person. I remember, actually, I'll give you a personal example on this since you invited me to talk more about myself.
Sure.
So this is about to become the Adam Grant show. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. I remember when I'm an introvert. I'm shy. I was extremely afraid of public speaking. And when I decided I wanted to do it, I said, okay, I have to go and learn from great speakers. So the first thing I did was I watched videos of MLK's I Have a Dream speech. It was completely demoralizing. I mean, I watched this, I'm like, I will never, no matter how hard I work at this, I will never get that good. And then I see he was 34 years old when he gave that speech. And I'm working at this, and I'm already in my mid-20s. I'm like, I might as well quit now. And I think that, it feels unfathomable, right? When you see that the innate ability differences between you and someone else could be that great, it just seems impossible for you. And so you assume then that is what is required.
But what you're doing with MLK is you're assuming that what you're observing is an innate. In fact, he grows up in an oral culture. He grows up watching his father and others preach sermons. I mean, he's surrounded in a world that is speaking in that vein. It's like he's actually not the right person to look at and see evidence of.
That's exactly right, but we don't know it. You watch someone as good as Martin Luther King Jr., and you think that's got to be a God-given gift.
Yeah.
There's no way he was ever bad at speaking, right? He's too good. It's impossible. What we don't see is the history you're describing. We admire people at their peak. We don't get to see the distance they've traveled. We don't see the fact that he started entering public speaking competitions when he was 15 years old, that he had 20 years of deliberate practice under his belt, that the year he gave the Dream speech alone, he gave over 350 speeches, which is probably as many speeches as you've given in your career, I would imagine. So I think we have unfortunate access to greatness. We see people at their peak, and we assume that they started far ahead of us.
But is this a universal affliction or an American affliction? Because I bring it up because one of my favorite chapters in this book is you have a chapter on talking about the educational system in Finland and how much it differs from the American system and in its sort of assumptions about learning. And it doesn't sound like the Finns, at least as is expressed in their educational system, hold to a notion of innate ability and so. What are we dealing with here? Is there something uniquely American about this idea?
There may be, to some extent. I think when I think about what we do culturally in the US that's different from other parts of the world, there is a tendency to make the fundamental attribution error more in the US.
You should define that.
The tendency to attribute people's actions and station to their innate characteristics as opposed to their situation and affordances and opportunity and circumstances. An idea that you thoroughly decimated in Outliers, I will point out. But we still do it a lot in the US, right? We're an individualistic society. What we like to do is we like to say, okay, you are where you are because of the things that are inside of you. And I think you're right. I think in Finland, I think in Estonia, we could probably make a whole list of other countries. There's a stronger sense that every child has hidden potential. And it's the job of parents and teachers and coaches to realize it in two senses of the word. One, to recognize it, and then two, to develop it. And I think if you move to Southeast Asia, for example, you would say, well, people are much more a product of their group. And so we would recognize that anyone in the right setting could potentially grow to achieve greater things.
Mm-hmm. Let's zero in on this a little bit. What is the particular sin that's attached to this belief, this too strong a belief in innate talent? Is it that we're in too much of a hurry to identify a high achiever, or is it that we simply underestimate the effect that lifetime learning or habits of practice have on someone's ability?
I think both.
Both.
Can I say both?
Yeah.
Okay, both. Do you want me to elaborate?
A little. I mean, I'm still puzzled by this.
Not really.
No, because it seems to me fundamentally paradoxical, and no one's properly explained to me why it would be the case that a culture like the United States, which is the highest achieving, you could argue it's the highest achieving culture in the world on a number of metrics, should have a notion about achievement that is fundamentally wrong. It just doesn't make any sense. In fact, if you said to me that America was the one place where people recognize that hard work, that everyone has a lot of potential, and that it's revealed in hard work practiced over your life, and that trying to judge someone on the basis of their performance at 12 is a fool's errand. If someone said that is a distinctly American view, I would have said that makes sense. It doesn't make any sense at all that we should have it backwards of all cultures.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, which is probably why I didn't try to explain it in the book as I think about it. It is really puzzling, though, as we talk about it. I think part of the problem is our country feels too big to invest in everybody. And so what we often do is we say, okay, well, we're going to create gifted and talented programs. And we're going to build a winner-take-all system so that the kids with the true promise are going to get to rise to the top. And that allows us to believe in the notion of meritocracy. It allows us to feel like we've earned all the success that we've achieved as opposed to partially lucking into it. And I think that serves a function, right? It allows us, actually, system justification theory. Jost and Banaji and Nozick and others would say that most of us are highly motivated to justify the fairness of the system we're in. And sometimes even the people at the bottom of a system, it's harder to admit that the system you're in is broken than it is to do the reverse and say, all right, you know what? I guess where people get stuck, if you look at the data, is people at the very bottom of a system who are being disadvantaged by it. They have an easier time accepting the possibility that I'm not that great than saying the whole world is set up to stack the deck against me. And that's why, empirically, sometimes the people who are most disadvantaged by a system are the least likely to question and challenge what's broken about it.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a function there, right? It allows us to think that America, like when we talk about the American dream, and we say that anybody can live the American dream, this is the land of opportunity. We are justifying our system. And I think that serves a soothing function for a lot of people.
Yeah. There's some additional...
Can I add one data point?
Yeah.
Mike Norton and his colleagues showed that if you look at, if you ask Americans just to plot what like the wealth distribution looks like in our country, they think we live in Sweden. So, yeah. Anyway, go on. Tangent.
I want to talk a little bit about, which is allied to this. Another one of my favorite chapters in this book is about perfectionism. And it's sort of your critique of where perfectionism leads us, what it costs us. And you start with a really interesting discussion of your time as a diver in high school and how you were a perfectionist. Can you talk a little bit about how your perfectionism manifested itself and how you came to believe it was self-defeating?
Yeah, I actually, first, I didn't know I was a perfectionist when I started diving. And then at some point, it crystallized, and I thought it was a big advantage, because in diving, I mean, you've all heard Olympic announcers say perfect 10s. And I thought, okay, in a sport that's judged on perfection, aiming for perfection has got to be the way. And it was such a liability for me. more than an asset. There are a whole bunch of things that I did that were counterproductive. One was I just wasted a lot of time trying to perfect easy dives as opposed to learning harder ones, which limited my degree of difficulty. I actually got an award one year from my teammates. It was the If Only Award. And there was a little drawing of me on a paper plate with a cartoon that said, if only I had pointed my left pinky toe on that dive, I would have gotten an 8.5 instead of an 8. And that's not what mattered. I should have been stretching so I could actually touch my toes without bending my knees. That would have made me a better diver. I think not only did I focus on the wrong things, I ruminated a lot, I beat myself up a lot, and I was constantly shaming my past mistakes as opposed to trying to sort of educate my future self from those lessons, and that was not helpful. Probably the worst thing that I did, though, was the balking, where, diving, when you're going to take off forward, you walk down the board and then jump to the end. Well, if my approach wasn't perfect, I would just stop and start over, and stop and start over. And then there's a 2-balk rule, and then I have to get off the board, and then I'm not doing dives all practice because, what's the point of, yeah.
If you balk, in other words, if you stop and start again more than twice, you have to dismount from the...
Well, that was the rule that my coach, Eric Best, had to institute, because otherwise I would just balk all practice.
What's going on inside your head? Are you enjoying being a diver?
Yeah, I loved it, but I was really frustrated, feeling like I couldn't get it right. Couldn't get it right.
Were you externally successful at diving?
Not at first. I was the worst diver on our team.
Yeah.
By far.
Always, or just in the...
For my freshman year, I finished a long way behind both of my teammates, both of whom were state finalists in their first 2 years, and I didn't even qualify for the state meet my first year. So I was bad. I was really bad.
And then, when did you start reflecting on the experience and kind of... I think the reason I ask this question is, forgive me, Adam, if I could play Dr. Freud for a moment, and if you'd like to recline. I feel there's a lot more of, your books are a lot more of a personal project than you let on. And this one in particular, I was reading this one, and you have these little moments where you start talking about diving, and I think, if I was a psychoanalyst, I would say, Adam, this book is really about you trying to make sense of the mistakes that little Adam made and the experiences that little Adam had. Is that not fair?
I mean, I wouldn't frame that in Freudian terms, because I think he set psychology back a century.
Oh, of course you would say that.
But
it's like...
I mean, his approach was so unscientific. And if you disagree with him, well, you're in denial. How is that helpful to anyone?
Exhibit A. Who's in denial here?
I will say there are some good meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials of psychodynamic therapy that show that it can have efficacy for some people in some situations, but I'm still extremely skeptical. Anyway,
Adam,
I will not be paging Dr. Freud.
Where you are. You're at the 92nd Street Y in a place called Manhattan, and you're dissing psychoanalysis. What?
I don't know, Malcolm.
You want people to buy your book afterwards, and this is what you're telling them?
First of all, I think most people here have already bought the book, but more importantly, I think a good therapist tries to work themselves out of a job instead of keeping you on their couch for 25 years. And I also think there's a point at which you stop blaming your behavior on the sins of your parents and start taking responsibility for your adult choices.
I brought this up because I was wondering whether you were doing a version of the same thing, which was at the age of, how old are you now?
Now, 42.
At the age of 42, still working out the problems you had as a swimmer, as a diver in high school.
Oh, don't ever call a diver a swimmer. Yeah, no. That's like me calling you a jogger as a runner.
That's right.
But anyway, no. So I think there's an interesting question here, which is, I don't know what to do with this exactly, but I think there's a difference between trying to work out the problems of little Adam, which is how Malcolm Freud would approach this discussion, and trying to figure out if there are lessons from my biggest struggles and also my greatest moments of growth that could become teachable moments for me and others.
Yeah.
Like I'm not like obsessed with, oh no, like I had the wrong mentality as a diver, and it directly contradicts the Thomas Curran meta-analysis of perfectionism, and if I could only go back and tell my younger self about this research, everything would be different. Right, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reflect on the fact that I really was my own worst enemy for a good part of my diving career. But then I ended up ascending to a much greater height than I ever thought possible. Thank you, Eric, because no one else would have seen any potential in me whatsoever. And I can quote several coaches who did not. I think that like there's something to be learned about that. Like I should not have made the state finals.
Yeah.
I should not have gotten where I got as a diver. I shouldn't have been what was I doing in the Junior Olympic Nationals as somebody who literally was called Frankenstein because I didn't bend my knees when I walked? Like something about this does not add up. And so I think that juxtaposing those kinds of moments with what does the social science tell us is really powerful.
But if you had, I guess what I'm trying to say is the work that you've done, the extraordinary work that you've done as an adult is in some way, we're all beneficiaries of some of these struggles you had as a, right? If you had been this kind of non-nerdy golden boy who was a kind of diving prodigy and to whom things came easily, we don't get this book.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But you want this book, you're saying. So I have to suffer so you can read this book?
No, yes.
Good.
Actually.
It was worth it.
No, but I mean, but this is, to go back to our earlier point, this is another kind of crucial flaw in the kind of obsession with innate ability and the way in which we celebrate. We happen to celebrate those who achieve things early and without apparent effort. And that is that we're not thinking about the downstream consequences, right? We're not thinking that a lot of what looks like struggle at an early age is simply kind of raw material and preparation for some kind of future better thing, right? Struggling as a diver as a freshman is, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty small thing. But it's a little kernel that becomes something really interesting when you're 40 and you're interested in writing about hidden potential, right? It starts to matter then.
I think you're onto something important here. And I think I read a book once that called it Desirable Difficulty by you.
Yes.
I think that, yeah, this is actually something that Maurice Ashley stressed to me that I hadn't appreciated. So Maurice from the book is a chess grandmaster and I think an extraordinary coach who recognizes and brings out the hidden potential in kids that nobody else thought had a chance. And one of the things Maurice said is he has watched in chess over and over again, the biggest prodigies young are the ones who have the biggest struggles when they're older because it came too easily to them at first. And they're used to kind of having this natural success. And all of a sudden, they lose a game and they can't take it. Mm-hmm. And they haven't, I think the fundamental problem there, if you look at the research, is they have not built the character skills that are necessary to face obstacles. They don't know how to embrace discomfort. They don't know how to accept the right imperfections and say, these mistakes are actually part of my growth. And they don't know how to become sponges and study their games and ask, okay, what are the relevant lessons from these games? And then whose input should I listen to and who should I filter out? And so I think that sometimes early success does a major disservice to our future selves.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded, a couple weeks ago, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Orlando, Florida, long story. And I emailed,
you emailed me about this.
I emailed Adam. There's two surgeons sitting next to me. Of course, I was eavesdropping. And one of them had a daughter who was at Cornell Medical School. And he was boasting about how she loved Cornell. Cornell's amazing. She got into Cornell, isn't that fantastic? Blah, blah, blah. And I emailed Adam and I was like, how does this guy get it completely backwards? Why doesn't he boast about his daughter that, my daughter's having an amazing time in medical school. Isn't it amazing that she's the kind of person who can go into an institution and find what's meaningful to her and flourish? And, he was focused on Cornell and he wasn't interested in the character traits his own daughter had that allowed her to flourish and be happy and find meaningful. And I was just like, there's something about parents, what you're describing is, why are parents so bad at kind of decoding the psychology of their own children? It just strikes me as like,
well,
why are we making these mistakes? If in fact, being a prodigy is a bad predictor of adult success and ill prepares you for the kind of complicated work you need to do later, then why on earth are we so in love with prodigies? Like, I'm just baffled by this.
well, I think what we have here, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the particular surgeon that you're eavesdropping on, but I think we have someone who's not thinking enough about his own child and instead thinking about his own ego, would be my guess. I mean, there's probably a lot to be unpacked there, but I mean, when psychologists study this, they talk about parental over-involvement and over-identification. And the notion that as a parent, like we were touching on this earlier, you start to define your own success by your children's accomplishments. And I just want to sit parents down. I see this all the time with our students at Penn. I want to sit these parents down and say, like, what your children achieve is not a reflection of your greatness as a parent. Like, you should be much more concerned with who your kids become and how they treat other people. Being a great parent is not about how much prestige your kids attain in their school choices or in their jobs. It's not about career success, it's about character. Yeah. And I think you might have found someone who had not yet internalized that message.
You say, on this subject of perfectionism, I want you to talk a little bit more about what, in general, what precisely is damaging about having a perfectionistic attitude, and what do you feel we should have instead?
Okay, so if you look at the Curran work, which I think is the most comprehensive and rigorous to date, what we see goes wrong with perfectionists is one, they lose the forest and the trees. So they tend to focus on small details and overlook the big picture. Two, they do a lot of the rumination and sort of self-shaming as opposed to self-compassion that's necessary for learning from your mistakes. And three, they actually tend not to stretch themselves much. They want to focus on the things they know they can master, as opposed to venturing into uncharted territory. And by avoiding failure, they actually avoid risk-taking and they avoid learning and challenging themselves. And that means they end up with a static or even ever-narrowing comfort zone, as opposed to an expanding domain of expertise.
You make the comment in the book that you think perfectionism of the sort you've just defined is on the rise. Why would it be on the rise?
So empirically, perfectionism has risen in the US, in the UK, and the great nation of Canada. Shout out to all the Canadians in the room. Honorary Canadian here. We were talking about this a few minutes earlier. I grew up driving south to Canada, which I'm very proud of. Windsor Tunnel, for those who are puzzled. Anyway, so I think if you look at why it's increasing, what everybody does is they say social media. Like, it's got to be social media. Everybody has a perfect image of themselves on Instagram, and that's leading our kids to have unrealistic expectations. That may be part of the story, but guess what? Perfectionism started rising a generation before social media existed. It started rising when Mark Zuckerberg was in diapers. So there's got to be something else going on, and my read of the evidence is there are two things that seem to be contributing to it, and both of them are parental behaviors. One of them is rising parental expectations for kids, holding children to increasingly impossible standards. And two is increasingly harsh criticism of kids who don't meet those standards.
So why would, okay, let's take one step further. Why would parents, I mean, it seems like an obvious question, but I don't know that I know a kind of good answer. Why would parents' expectations have risen? So we're talking about the 90s, 80s, 90s. What's driving parental expectations in that era?
So we don't know. I think probably the consensus hunch right now is that the world has gotten more competitive. So, however hard it was to get into college in the 80s, it got a little bit harder in the 90s, and it got increasingly difficult over time. And so in a world that feels more and more zero-sum, I think we've probably seen a lot of talk about how the current generation of kids is the first in America that might not sort of outdo their parents or have a better standard of living than their parents. And so when you see that world, when you see a world of scarcity, you think, I've got to do whatever it takes to help my kids succeed, forgetting that the very things you're doing to try to help your kids succeed are just turning them into achievement robots who one day realize, like, this is no way to live a life and burn out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did your parents, would you think your parents were guilty of that particular?
Not at all.
They weren't?
No.
Why not?
Well, and I take it back. I think my mom used to tell me, I remember her saying growing up, she would say, all right, Adam, no matter what grade you get, as long as you do your best, I'll be proud of you. And then she would add, but if you didn't get an A, I'll know you didn't do your best. She said it with a smile. I think she was half kidding, but I took it seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I guess there was a little, I didn't get the harsh criticism though, but I definitely felt like expectations were high.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your, like one of the costs of, you write about in the book of the perfectionist attitude is there's an absence of joy in learning. And I'm curious about, can you compare your experience, for example, to the appearance of your kids? Do you see your kids in a markedly different universe than you grew up in?
No, it feels, I don't feel like I missed the joy of learning.
Yeah.
I think when I started losing the joy was when I got obsessed with diving. And I was hard on myself for not improving as fast as I wanted to. I think, for most of my childhood, like, I thought it was fun to take on new challenges and sort of test myself. And I feel like our kids have the same attitude.
Yeah. One last set of questions. What are we doing? We also have questions we can get to in a moment. But the last chapter of your book, you talk a little bit about interviews and admissions and college admissions and things. And I had some big and some small questions about that. You have a very interesting part where you talk about what the evidence, social science evidence, tells us about the success and or failure of affirmative action programs. Can you summarize what social science tells us about that?
Yeah, I went in to read the evidence to ask, like, what is the impact of these programs? A lot of people have strong ideological positions on them. I feel like my job as a social scientist is to look at the most careful research that's been done and try to paint the picture of what do we know. And I think what the evidence suggests is that affirmative action programs are a double-edged sword, even for the very people they're trying to help. So on the one hand, they do manage to open doors for people who have historically been denied opportunity by virtue of group membership. On the other hand, if you enter a university or a workplace that is known to have affirmative action, you perform worse if you are a beneficiary of that program than if the program didn't exist. So we see this with women, we see it with racial minorities. What happens is, and I don't think this will shock anyone, people start to doubt whether they really deserve that spot. Am I qualified? Do I belong here? It's a massive version of imposter syndrome and not the healthy kind. And then other people question it too. And they're like, well, I don't think you really got in on your own merit. And that self-doubt and constantly being doubted by others, that takes a toll. It's exhausting to deal with. It's distracting to constantly question your capabilities day in, day out. And so I came away from this evidence thinking, I don't know where I stand. I think that we're sort of damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's an alternative approach that might be helpful to think about.
Two questions about that. One is, why doesn't that same logic hold for the white beneficiaries of affirmative action? If I'm a legacy kid, gets into Harvard because daddy went to Harvard, why aren't I walking around with a big burden of imposter syndrome? I'm only here because daddy gave $17 million to... Does it not work? Are white people exempt?
Can we just pause to acknowledge the fact you just called legacy admission affirmative action for white people?
That's what it is.
I don't disagree with you.
Exactly what it is.
I think that's an accurate characterization. I think that not only should legacy admission be banned, I think that it used to be used by a lot of Ivy League schools as a tiebreaker. And I think it should be a reverse tiebreaker. If you're on equal footing with somebody whose parents didn't go to an elite institution, then you already had an advantage. So the other person should get in.
Yeah. But wait, why don't those people pay a penalty? It strikes me that they just swan through life just fine.
Yeah, well, look, I think, what do I say here as a classmate of Jared Kushner's?
You're conflicted, what you're saying is.
Sorry, no. I think, first of all, a lot of people don't know who the legacies are, unless you have a very recognizable
They
name.
should be required to tattoo a giant, like, H on their back.
If you want legacy admission consideration, you have to tattoo your legacy scarlet letter. Wow, I can see that going very well. Okay, so a lot of people don't know. I think also there's not the same stigma. Historically, there hasn't been the same stigma associated with legacy admission. So affirmative action is seen as lowering standards.
Yeah.
And in most cases, it's not, right? It's just saying we're going to look at people who all meet the qualifications and requirements, and then we're going to make sure that those whose groups have been historically disadvantaged get a shot. But I think in the case of legacy, there hasn't been that stigma. It's been assumed, oh, you come from a genius family, you belong here.
Yeah. So the problem is really not necessarily the problem is inherent in the notion of, in this case, treating a group of disadvantaged students differently. It's the narrative we tell around the policy that we don't have the same kind of, we have a disparaging narrative around racial affirmative action, but not a disparaging narrative around rich people affirmative action.
Well put.
Yeah.
Rich people affirmative action.
It's just
You
fine.
coined
Or if you're like a fencer, not to bring up fencing again, but
What
the athlete.
What do you have against fencing?
No, the athlete, the special deals given to athletes who apply to these schools are as big as the deals given to anyone else, or greater, right? If you have some obscure, pointless academic achievement, that's like, they're like, come on in. You play polo? Oh my God, we need you on our campus. It's just nuts.
Wait, can I just say here, though, I think, look, we had a Supreme Court ruling that happened as the book went to press.
Yeah.
And I think actually one of the ideas that I float in this book is maybe an option now that we ought to take seriously, which is maybe we should stop defining people by their group membership. Maybe instead of assuming that just because people came from a particular background, that they had the same degree of difficulty and the same adversity, we should actually get to know the individual students and find out the obstacles they faced, and then adjust our expectations of them according to how much poverty did they individually face, according to did they run into major challenges. And I think that seems like a much more fair way to give people who have been disadvantaged a real shot.
Yeah. Wait, I mean, there's much to be said for that idea, and that's a longer conversation, but I have one last, we're running out of time, but I have one last thing I want to say. I'm asking you to give me some advice, because I'm working on a book right now, and I deal with this very question we're talking about in this book.
Are we talking about the revision of The Tipping Point?
Yes.
Or a different book?
The revision of The Tipping Point.
Are we allowed to say that publicly, that you're rewriting
Yes,
The Tipping Point?
I'm revising The Tipping Point.
Malcolm Gladwell is rewriting The Tipping Point.
And I was thinking of posing the following question. Given what you're saying, what advice would you give to a bright, ambitious African-American student who's interested in STEM, wants to be a doctor or engineer or scientist of some kind, who has two admissions offers, one from an Ivy League school and one from an HBCU. So one where he goes, or she goes with the stigma of affirmative action, and one where she goes without the stigma. What would you tell that student?
That's a fascinating question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to advise on it, is my first reaction. My second is...
You wrote a book called Hidden Potential.
Yeah, but I'm trying to look at what works for most of the people most of the time, not necessarily assume that I know the path that's going to be most effective for a complete stranger. I'd want to see much better data about what are the life trajectories of students with similar profiles who both have the same set of opportunities and then end up for a variety of reasons in one or the other. I guess the first thing I would want to do, though, is I'd want to know, what are your goals? Like, are you trying to maximize your status or objective career success? Are you trying to, to lead a life you can be proud of? Are you pursuing happiness or meaning? Like, I think there are lots of different outcomes, and I think the big mistake that I see, I've had a lot of students come by office hours with these kinds of dilemmas over the years. Often they're grad school dilemmas or they're job dilemmas, but sometimes it's high schoolers trying to choose a college. And the main advice that I find myself giving them is to say, you don't want to just define your success by achieving your goals. You should think about success as living your values. Mm-hmm. If you have a career target that you hit, but it requires you to compromise your principles, that's not success, that's failure. And it's the worst kind of failure because you've abandoned what matters most to you. So why don't we talk about what your values are? Is one of your core principles to break to break glass ceilings? Do you want to prove to people that other people can follow in your footsteps? Karen Knowlton is here. Karen did some brilliant work on being a trailblazer. Is one of your core priorities in life to open a door and clear a path for other people? If so, you can ask, do I want to do this by starting out in an Ivy League school? Or do I want to go to an environment where I might be more supported and maybe it's easier to blaze a trail later? I don't know. I can't predict the future. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of conversation I'd want to have, and it wouldn't end with advice. It would end with me asking, what have you learned through this conversation about your values, and which path do you think is going to help you avoid straying from them?
Mm-hmm. Adam, it's a beautiful answer to the question. You started by saying you didn't think you could answer the question, then you gave me a beautiful answer to the question.
But that's because I didn't answer the question.
No. But it goes to, and this is actually I think a lovely moment to kind of sum up. When I read this book, the first and overwhelming thought I had was, we really are asking the wrong questions about something like potential. We're just like, our premises are all wrong. Right, that's what you're getting at here. Right, in one chapter after another, you're just saying, wait a minute, we're starting with this perspective, and it's just like, why? What do we? It's that kind of need to go back to fundamentals and re-ask some really basic questions is what is really wonderful about this book.
It's wonderful of you to say. That was definitely my goal when I sat down to write it.
Yeah, we're running very short on time. I want to answer a couple of questions before we go, but you did want to say something before we get to that.
I did. Before we segue to audience questions, I just wanted to say that last time we were here, the last time you invited me to this version of your house was 7 years ago, I think, in 2016. And Chris Kelly was here, and he lived a few blocks away for a long time. And I think Chris, I wish he could be here with us today. I think Chris did an amazing job modeling what this book is about. He worked in corporate law for a long time. I think it's fair to say that he hated it, from what I understand. And a lot of us just think we're stuck in that position, and we've missed out on our hidden potential. Chris discovered that he had a real passion for making people's work experiences better, in part because he felt his was not so great. And he really wanted to pay that forward, so what did he do? He went back to school, he rethought his career. He ended up pursuing HR and worked in HR for a while, and sadly passed away. But making that kind of change in your 30s, I think, is a great example of the fact that it's never too late to pursue the potential that you might have missed early on. And I think he also reminds us that you don't have to be an Olympian or a Yo-Yo Ma, for that matter, to make those kinds of changes. And I wanted to pause to dedicate this event tonight to Chris's memory.
Yeah. That was very...
Can I say one other thing on that? Mm-hmm. Chris was a Buffalo Bills fan.
Oh my God.
You are also a Buffalo Bills fan, and in honor of Chris, as a long-suffering Detroit Lions fan,
yeah,
who was not suffering until yesterday this season,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think is worse? Getting to 4 Super Bowls and losing them all, or never having a chance in hell at making a Super Bowl in the first place? Which one of us do you think feels more pain?
Well, I think that it's worse. It's the better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. That's really what you're asking here, right? You've never loved at all.
I've loved. I've just had my heart broken over and over again.
I think it's worse because we got a glimpse and then God stepped in and cruelly ripped it away, pushed the ball right. And the pain that I suffered, have suffered over my 60 years of affiliation with this franchise, dwarfs whatever you went through. You're 42.
Okay, so I think you're completely wrong about this.
I got 20 years on you.
You were...
I was suffering before you were born. I was living through, the Joe Cribbs era when we were really good and then the door got slammed in our face. I don't even...
Yeah.
If you saw my group, I was going to bring my phone and just read group texts from my Bills fans from last Sunday when we suffered a kind of humiliation so great that you have to be a Bills fan to consider it ordinary, right? Because it's happened so often.
But Malcolm,
you
are so wrong.
But you wouldn't even, if what happened to me on Sunday happened to you, you wouldn't be here. You'd be curled up in a small ball in the closet of your upstairs bedroom.
You are so wrong about this. So look, you're obviously subscribing to the sort of close call counterfactual theory of misery, which is just like it hurts. You all know, I think Danny Kahneman's written about this. Eldar Shafir has studied it. If you miss a flight by 5 minutes, it's devastating. If you miss it by an hour, nobody cares. Like, you were so close, and you say that hurts so much. Here is my argument back to you.
Yeah.
You have had hope in your life as a football fan. You got to watch Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas go to 4 Super Bowls. And all 4 of those seasons, you were on cloud 9 for, like a third of a year. Meanwhile, I went to one playoff game where I had to watch Brett Favre run left and throw a ridiculous pass right to Sterling Sharp, ruin the Lions' next 30 years. Barry Sanders retires as the greatest running back in history, 30 years old. I've never even gotten a taste of joy.
Yeah.
So my life is much worse as a football fan. I rest my case.
Okay,
I do want to say, though.
We're going to end on a simple vote. Let's have the audience vote on this.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to measure this by the sound of your clapping.
Okay, wait, before you clap, I just want to be clear about what we're calculating. We're calculating Malcolm's one night of anguish, 4 Super Bowls,
Adam,
and his whole season of joy for years against my almost 40 years ongoing suffering.
You're leading the witness.
Of course I am.
The question's very
I just want to be clear about the math we're doing.
Who's suffered more? Me, poor little Malcolm, or the celebrated New York Times-bestselling author, Adam Grant? All right, those who think Adam Grant has suffered more. All right. Those who think that I have suffered more. I think the evidence is clear, Adam.
I actually could not tell who was louder. Did you think you won? Because that's confirmation bias.
Of course.
But anyway,
of course I think.
I have one other thought, which is if the Lions can recover from yesterday, I believe that we have a moral obligation in the Super Bowl, if we make it, to suit up Barry Sanders for one running play.
Oh, that's a very sweet thought.
Do you support this decision?
A lot of ifs in there, but yeah. I do support that.
He's in his mid-50s. He can handle one ankle-breaking run. Go on.
Adam, I think we've gone way over time. But this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming all the way to Upper West Side. The audience has clearly forgiven you for dissing psychoanalysis, even though, as I stated, at least half of them are in psychoanalysis. And
look where it's gotten you.
And please go and buy Adam's book. It's out. He'll be out in this lobby signing. And thank you all for coming.
Wait, hold on. You can't end there. You can't end there. Before we wrap, I just want to say really quickly, first of all, I want to do a special thanks to Richard Pine, to Marissa Shandell, to Karen Knowlton, to Eric Best, and a whole bunch of other people who this book would not exist without. And secondly, Malcolm, I really want to say thanks to you because you were the first person who, when Give and Take came out, you were literally the first person who said something nice about it. And I think you saw hidden potential in me that I didn't see in myself, and you have bent over backward to support me as a writer, to teach me how to become a better writer, to recommend my work to other people, and I just feel really lucky to count you as a friend and frequent sparring partner, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all.